Go. Good morning, Stephen Downs. Thanks for joining us here at Yellow Shelf.
Good morning, Joanna. I'm delighted to be here and thank you for inviting me.
It's my pleasure. Stephen, you're a journalist, you're a writer. You've got a new book called Mural.
Yes.
Yes. Stephen, what do we
People
need
raving about the cover already. Perhaps that's the best thing about it.
No. We want to hear all about it. It is a stunning cover. It's probably not doing it justice, holding it up here. But Stephen, tell us all about the book. Tell us, what do we need to know about Mural?
Well, where do I start? It's interesting in that it's a book that it involved no planning, no plotting. I'm like W.G. Sebald, the great German author. I'm in a sense against the idea of planning and plotting a book to the nth degree. He used to say that he hated the idea of an author being a director, scene shifter, costume designer, and the person who characterised all the people in the book, etc., etc. So that this book more or less arrived from straight out of my unconscious, as Freud used to call it, and onto the page. And readers will note the digressions, and in style, it probably follows W.G. Sebald, the great German writer, who unfortunately died in a car crash in 2001, but he wrote 4 great prose fictions, he called them. He didn't even call them novels or fictions or anything, because they mixed fact and fiction. And you'll find in Mural there is a lot of factual material about 2 men in particular who were quite odd in their own way. And Mural is a narrative told by a very nasty person, a criminal, who's banged up in a psychiatric secure facility somewhere. And he's been asked by his psychiatrist, who's given him a laptop, to write down his thoughts. And so he's writing a sort of a why did I do it sort of thing. We don't know exactly what he did. But he's had this obsession through his life with these 2 characters. So he says to his psychiatrist in the book that he wants to explain himself through these 2 characters, which is in itself a bit odd. So there's a lot of fact in the book about the 2 characters, one who became perhaps the English-speaking world's most famous sexologist, and the second who is Australia's most famous a public painter, just by area alone. He has lots of murals and stained glass windows in churches, and the Hall of Memory stained glass windows are all his work. That's Napier Waller. And he was an interesting character too, because in the 1920s, when he was already in his 20s into his 30s, he did a lot of erotic watercolours. And so our narrator, this bloke banged up, this awful person who writes beautifully, I must say. I'm sorry, I had to get that in. Terrible joke, but I hope it is. I hope the book is like walking on a fairway at Royal Melbourne. And that a lot of it, I paid a lot of attention, as I do, with things like syntax and grammar and getting things correct. So I hope it's a lovely, easy read, but there are a lot of digressions, as madmen tend to do, and tend to be the sort of people who go off on a tangent. So as well as the facts, there are, I think, some very interesting and quite violent stories. It says, I don't know how it got onto the blurb and the dust jacket inside the cover there, that there's a true story about a man who went mad. He's a fellow from Brittany, went mad about the Karnak stones and ended up a murderer because of that. That's all total fiction. It's not a true story, as it says in the blurb.
Yep.
There might have been people who've gone mad over the Karnak stones. I think I probably would too if I had to live in Brittany near them. There are these rows and rows of stones that are huge. Some of them are the size of limousines, as he says in the book, that go on and on for kilometres, and how the people thousands of years ago got them into place. just like Stonehenge in Britain. We'll never know. Astonishing sorts of things. So it's a mix of the facts concerning these two men, and then a lot of imagined fictional stuff that's come straight out of my unconscious.
Yeah. And Stephen, the book's set in Australia and Italy, like
It's set mostly in Australia. The protagonist, the narrator, is in an Australian institution somewhere, and several of the stories that occur in the book are set in Australia. That's true, but one quite long one is set in Ravenna, where there are some marvelous mosaics in the churches there, but some in most importantly, and so the narrator has been there to look at these, pardon me, murals, and is taken aside by a French woman who's had a rather nasty experience.
Sure. And Stephen, what inspired you to write this? I know, like I said in the introduction, you're a journalist, you're obviously a quality writer. What inspired you to write this particular novel?
I don't know. I mean, writing's my job. My first paying job was to send through 4 times a Saturday afternoon, I think, to the Herald Sun and then the Sporting Globe a long time ago, the cricket scores for sub-district seconds cricket. And I was hugely paid for a kid in those days, £1.10 and 6 or something. And that's where my writing career started. I must have been 13 or 14 years old. So I've been doing it ever since. It's my job. It's what I do. I've always been interested in the sexologist. I'm not sure why, and researching another book in England, in London, in, I think, 2000. I think this is when it happened. I thought, I'll have a look at what's in the British Library about this particular fellow. I don't want to name him now because I kind of leave that in the book after we get through the story. So of his early life in Australia is phenomenal. As a teenager, his father, who was a ship's captain in 1870, just dropped him in New South Wales, said, away you go. And he had bad stomach problems, and he was pasty and weedy, had no academic qualifications at all. And here he was, dumped in Australia, and ended up a teacher, and a whole lot of other interesting things happened to him. But I found this all out from the British Library by spending 3 days there and with my white gloves on, going through all his letters and correspondence. And I think I'm the first person to do it worldwide. There are biographies of this particular man and an autobiography, but they all kind of skim over his teenage years in Australia when he was teaching. And during those teenage years, he had what these days, would be called an obsession with young girls. And he decided, a virgin, a guy who was brought up very heavily Christian, he decided when he was teaching that he would make sex his life's work. So I just find that astonishing. And so I researched him, and I've had his story in the back of my mind for a long time. And when I sat down one day, I can't even remember when, perhaps 2 or 3 years ago, to write this book, I started off with him.
And Stephen, the book's out on the 1st of September, is that correct?
That's right. Yeah, it should be in bookshops now, I think. Transit Lounge have done a marvellous job. The book, my most recent book, 2021, was published by a tiny American indie publisher because no Australian publisher would touch it. And it's gone on to be one of 5 shortlisted in the 2022 Prime Minister's Literary Awards. But it's another book in a similar style. I did a PhD on Zabald, so I know a little bit about the technical aspects, which are not particularly difficult to do, but you've got to know a little bit about writing. And after all, I've been doing it for a long, long time. And then incorporate these technical aspects of your writing to create something that you hope is a thing of beauty, and you also hope that it challenges readers and makes them think intellectually. And is also something that is uncanny. Nicholas Royal, an academic who studied the uncanny, in particular writers who used it, and Harold Bloom, the great American literary critic, both say that the best books are uncanny. The
Yeah.
great books are uncanny. They speak to us in a foreign language that somehow or other we understand. And if
Wow.
you think back through the great books that you've read, you think, my gosh, that's true. And
Hmm.
so I try to incorporate a bit of that into my books.
You certainly do. So well done, Stephen. And Stephen,
Yes.
look, I just want to end by saying I'll put this in the show notes to make it easy, but what's the best way to connect with you? I know you've got a website that people can look at. Like, how do
Yes.
we reach out to you, or how do we connect with you if we're curious, if we want to know more?
I suppose the website's the best way to go. You've got my email address if you want to put that on the notes. I'm very happy for you to do that.
Sure.
I better not leave any telephone
No,
numbers
no,
because I
no,
remember,
nothing
I
like
remember
that. We'll just
in, in
we'll
the
we'll
years
lead
when I
people
was
towards your website. I think that might be a
yes,
great
I think
way
so. In
to.
the years when I was a restaurant critic, I got only one book call, but a bloke rang up and said, "I'm going to shoot your knees off."
Oh
So I didn't.
no.
Yes.
That's a good story. Wow.
Those were the days. But
Yeah.
anyway, yep.
Well, listen, enjoy the book's out, enjoy
Yep.
what comes of it. Is there any more books, Stephen, in the works, or are you just going to wait and
I've
see?
got Barry at Transit Lounge, Barry Scott, has a novel I wrote a few years ago and also a suite of short stories. I'm
Oh,
hoping that he'll look kindly on them. He might not. They
yeah.
might not be his cup of tea, but they're probably a bit more approachable
Yeah.
than either Mural or The Hands of Pianists. The short stories have done very well in UK competitions. One actually won one, and several have been
Oh,
shortlisted and longlisted. And the novel has never been published. It's a full length, I think it's 80,000 words roundabout. And it's a bit fantastical too.
yeah. Okay. Well, look, let's wait and see. And I thank you so much for your time to share Mural with Yellow Shelf.
Thank you very much, Joan. It's been a delight.
Cheers.